Another month, another video where I pretend like you care about the games that I played. Happy New Year. I played a good mix of long and short games, indie, AA, AAA, old, new, VR, everything this month, so hopefully you'll spot some stuff that you might enjoy. Here's the rating scale I'm using. Remember, 5 is not a perfect game, but one that I recommend to just about everyone. Here's the reason I'm not including the demos I played this time around. Here's a link to that video, unless I forget, and here's a monkey wearing a sombrero. Let's do this. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Memes are effective marketing, what can I say? Unless you're Morbius. I don't know if this is the best bad game I've played, or the worst good game I've played, or like a straight up masterpiece. It's so confusing. In a weird way, it reminds me of the Raimi Spider-Man movies where I can't tell at what points the movie or game is actually in on the joke. Like, it's clearly leaning to the weirdness at points, but other times I'm like, am I supposed to take this serious? Cause if I am, this is ridiculous, but if I'm not, this is genius. The voice acting is so over the top, the villains will have like 30-minute monologues complete with background football stadium sounds, goofy body movements, over-enthusiastic facial animations, and proud declarations of what university they attended.
Try University of Texas.
Like I said, I truly can't tell if this is on purpose or not, but it's flat out entertaining regardless. There were a lot of points where I got frustrated with the gameplay, especially early on when I didn't have a great handle on the unorthodox blocking system, and I also felt like the overall balancing was all over the place, which had a hand in that problem, but that was trumped by the sheer fun factor of this game when it is firing on all cylinders. When this game works, it feels amazing. I love how over the top boss fights get. Literally the first boss has you using homing missiles as stepping stones, and the last one has, this is incredible. I'm so glad I'm not reviewing these games straight up, because Metal Gear Rising is one of the hardest games to pin down that I've ever played, but if we're talking about this recommendation scale, I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. You might take a while to warm up to the combat, but this game is so insane and so often on a deep sale that if you're an action game fan, you gotta at least give it a peek. Let's go a lot smaller real quick. Auto. This is a very pleasant Metroidvania that doesn't have the bells and whistles of some of its cousins, but what it does have is great gameplay and simple but interesting puzzle mechanics. The difficulty curve feels perfect and your attacks feel incredibly satisfying when they land. During combat, you have a couple of ranged or special moves that you gather as the game goes along, but I got through most encounters relying almost solely on the basic attack button, not even charging attacks all that often, and it was a blast. The map isn't overly complicated, the story is subtle, and nothing all that new, but it's not intrusive to the experience, and the puzzles manage to be simple without feeling tacked on or boring. While Revengeance got a 4 for how insane and off the wall it was, despite the flaws that it also carried, Auto gets a 4 because it's a tight package that comes in, does exactly what it needs to, feels great to play, and then heads out. I've been shouting out a lot of shorter, lesser known Metroidvanias recently, and this is one that I think deserves a lot more attention than it has. Turbo Overkill. This game's fun, man. I already talked about the demo last month, so I won't repeat myself here, but one thing that surprised me the most about Turbo Overkill is the sheer length and size of its levels. A lot of games in this genre feature tight, short level design, but here you have this big cyberpunk playground to go through, sometimes doubling back, but not in a way that's annoying because the movement is so unrestrictive. At one point you even get a spaceship and hop in and out of it, eventually going to 3 separate buildings and working through the relentless enemies in each, and this is all one mission. It's crazy. I'd recommend anyone who's interested in fast-paced FPS games to check out the demo of this game, and if you enjoy what you play, which you probably will, check out the full title. It scales up incredibly well even in its early access phase. I never ran into performance issues or bugs. I do wish that some of the upgrades were more consistent, and there are a few spikes in difficulty, no doubt, but this thing is anything but complacent. It keeps pushing forward, it keeps stuffing different level layouts and additional mechanics into every mission. We're starting off scorching hot here with 3 straight 4 out of 5s for 3 completely different games. That streak does, unfortunately, end here though. Vader Immortal Episode 1 is a solid VR game that's supremely lacking in content. It was only 12 bucks Canadian to be fair, and I'm not usually one to freak out about how a game isn't worth its price because it's too short, but this thing is like 40 minutes, and it's a leave you wanting 40, not a concise package 40. I guess that makes sense because it's episode 1, but the thing ended right as it started to get going. Most of this game is just watching a couple of cutscenes that are admittedly pretty cool, like I'm staring at Darth Vader in the face, and it is a little creepy, and then you just kind of walk around with a little bit of world building. You have like 2 or 3 incredibly quick fights sprinkled in, but then a long one at the end that is cool for the first minute, but then it feels like it goes on with no additional value for another 10. It was to the point that I legitimately thought that I was doing something wrong. I was standing there wondering if I was supposed to die on purpose or something, because like 2 enemies were just constantly getting spit out on either side of me. Turns out I wasn't doing anything wrong, that's just how it's supposed to go, but it's never a good sign if you have like 4 fights in your game, and one of them I just want to be over when I get like a quarter of the way through. There is a dojo where you can experience another batch of action and challenges, but it's really standard stuff, and from what I've heard, the following episodes are even shorter, and the cool factor kind of diminishes as you go on. There are some fun moments, and fighting with a lightsaber is enjoyable, if incredibly easy, because they give you like a full presidential campaign's worth of time to read all the tells, but ultimately the experience feels a little bare. A 2 definitely feels a little too harsh for what I played, but this one is on the lighter end of a 3. There's other VR stuff that you should be playing before this for sure. Sunset Overdrive gets better the farther I get into it. When it started out, I was a bit put off by how slow you moved when you weren't on rails and how basic basic some of the superheroing felt, but a few hours in and you're dashing midair, hitting speed boosts, spitting fireballs out of your melee weapon, equipping a confusingly huge amount of modifiers, and bing bang boom, now you're zooming through the streets like a crazy person. There's definitely elements that could have used some improvement when it came to the parkour though, and as much as I adore Insomniac, some of their games have a subpar ratio of jokes that land versus jokes that don't. There's the occasional knee slapper in there, but there's also a lot of straight face gang, I won't lie. I'm incredibly fascinated by what Sunset Overdrive could be if Insomniac got another crack at it though, and that's why I'm cutting this one a little bit short, because most likely one of my next couple of videos is going to be a new Deserves Another Life video about this game, but for now, 3, I want a sequel, but there's a lot to iron out. Now, Chorus, this is an interesting one. This went way under the radar when it released at the tail end of last year for how huge it presents itself. This is a big game, which is both good and bad. The good is that you get a large-scale space game with a heap of content, not to mention one that's free with Game Pass. It's not a 100-hour RPG epic, but both main missions and side ones have a lot of meat on them. The most basic of side missions will take you through like 4 warp jumps and you have to delegate with a bunch of groups, and it just feels like they roll in endlessly. The places you explore are mainly filled with a metric buttload of asteroids and beautiful skyboxes. Seriously, this game looks incredible at times. And even though a lot of this is technically empty and just for show, the game does a good job making these areas feel massive by getting you to travel at crazy speeds to traverse it all. Fighting enemy ships is also really fun. You quickly get equipped with these upgrades that let you reposition effectively to avoid feeling like a dog chasing its tail. And the game felt like it was at its best when it was the last thing that I played for the night, as something with a fun, sometimes mindless loop, an epic scale, and a lot of excuses to shoot a bunch of bad guys. It does feel like it bites off a bit more than it can chew though. The story is word salad, it's needlessly confusing, and I just tuned it out eventually, not to mention I had a recurring bug where all the cutscenes would just play out completely void of sound. Like everything would be fine and then a cutscene would play silently for 3 minutes and then I'd be back in the game with full sound, so that was great. The voice acting is a little annoying at times, and missions are long, but they have very little variety. I think this is a fantastic, really fun background game that I honestly found kind of relaxing, but it's not everything that it sets out to be. We're following 3 straight 4s with 3 straight 3s. Screw it, TV corner. The TV channel's on hiatus, so I may as well talk about this stuff here. I'm not gonna give them scores or anything, just little blurbs. Feel free to skip this if you don't give a rat's ass. I won't care because I won't know. Stranger Things Season 4. I wouldn't have had the chance to watch Volume 2 by the time this video's up, but Volume 1 was baller. I think the plotline in 4 is the best main plotline that the show's ever had, and it feels incredibly well thought out. The COVID delays definitely had a positive effect here. Its side plots, though, are a little bit weaker. I've yet to see why this Hopper rescue stuff is important to anything other than getting him back in Hawkins, which is like, I still think it's a total cop-out for him not to have died in Season 3, so that's not a good enough reason. I've been tired of this 11 flashback stuff for 4 seasons now, and these scenes really dragged pretty hard, although they did culminate with the main plotline with an incredible payoff. And God knows what Mike Gang is doing. Like, how are you gonna go from the main character in the show to just being Will's crush, fam? Come on. A lot of this stuff can be entertaining in the moment, but it feels inconsequential compared to the main stuff in Hawkins, but despite that, this is competing for the best season of the whole show. Because the Hawkins stuff is so entertaining, and even if some side plots seem unimportant, they're not badly made. There's something about Season 4 that screams quality. I honestly can't say the same for the first 3 episodes of Season 3 of The Boys. People seem split on these episodes overall. I know a lot of people loved them, but I was on the camp of lots of cool individual scenes, but also a ridiculous amount of setup with no short-term payoffs or tectonic plate-shifting moments. Everything after those first 3 episodes, though, just beautiful. Herogasm is the obvious highlight as one of the best episodes I've seen of a show in years, but just overall, the direction that they're taking Butcher and especially Huey is so interesting. I love how the group has a real conflict on what measures need to be taken to fight the Soups, giving Homelander a real threat to deal with, expanding on the stories of so many secondary characters. I love it. There was a slow start, and just like Stranger Things, I'm still waiting on the finale while I'm recording this, but this season's really turned around and I can't wait to see how it ends. And yeah, those were the only real shows that I watched this month. I don't know if there's any other... Barry Season 3, baby. I could legit talk about this for the next 5 minutes, but I'm gonna try and keep it short. Barry is the perfect blend of drama and black comedy, which almost feels like it draws from the same energy as The Office, just more violent. A lot of the humor and its more dramatic human moments come from the awkward pauses, long uncut takes, and an incredibly conservative use of sound. And with Season 3, it manages to make 4 hours feel long and stretched out, but also full of eventful moments and realistic, methodically crafted, and complicated character arcs. Plus, it's just as funny as it always was. Just like The Office, I think the style can push some people away because it can feel empty and slow if you look at it from a certain angle, but it has such a unique cadence that it also stands out to the people who do enjoy it. I think Season 2 might still be my personal favorite, but 3 feels like it's technically more well made and features just as many highlights as the last 2. Back to games, I guess. Ghostwire Tokyo is what I wanted Far Cry 6 to be, a game to just shut my brain off to and go through the motions. It had a lot of potential that it left on the table, which I talked about here. It doesn't have great combat, it's very basic in its world and level design. It's an exceptionally average game, but I still for whatever reason found what it was putting down to be more enjoyable than Far Cry 6. It's got some cool visuals and effects, some of the enemies look wild, and I think honestly just the fact that it had more of an out there look and feel is what did the trick for me. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, you can check out the dedicated video I made for it. I gave Far Cry a 2, so I'm giving Ghostwire a 3. So many 3s out here, man. Let's talk about a 5. Yoku's Island Express. I finally played it. Surprise, it's as good as I thought it would be. The concept of a pinball Metroidvania is incredible. It's got such a unique movement system because of that, and best of all, there's zero fat on this thing. I got through the whole main game in one sitting and then just went back in after to clear out more of the map. There's an M. Night Shyamalanian twist at the end, and front to back you're met with so much charm, such a boppy soundtrack, and so many hits of dopamine with a collection of literally anything in these mini pinball pockets. Any complaints that I have are so minor that I've forgotten about them at this point. Anyone can pick this up and play it. They don't even need to have played that many games before, they just need to understand pinball and the basic concept of following quest lines. Like I said, this one's a straight 5. I'm so glad that I finally played it. Stride is another VR game that I wish had a bit more content, but this time around I'm still content with what it is. I think it would have been really fun to experience a short campaign with handcrafted levels and enemy placement, but Stride instead gives you a handful of pick and play modes. One involves completing a bunch of objectives one after another with a time limit on each, one is a time trial parkour mode, and one is an endless mode where you escape this creeping black void and fight enemies while you're at it. The parkour is really responsive, although I did have a hard time consistently getting the hang of jumping off of objects. It's a little bit easy to get motion sickness early on, but eventually that gets better, and once you get a handle on the game, being able to hop on platforms, turn around and shoot enemies, and then swing away like Spider-Man never gets old. As a VR parkour action game, I think the only other thing I could ask for is a campaign mode, but even without that, Stride lives up to its concept and becomes a nice in-between game to drop into every once in a while between longer play sessions. 4 out of 5. Olija's art style is very squishy. I do believe that's a technical term for it. Everything bends and compresses despite being pixel art, and the game feels pretty fluid as a result. I like the concept of this guy going out to provide for his struggling village. The story isn't like a game changer or anything, but it's a nice setup to what you're doing, and the Mjolnir harpoon weapon is a massive plus whether you're fighting or exploring. It lets things get a bit more chaotic and adds to that sense of fluidity. Encounters are occasionally mindless, and that's exacerbated by a lot of straightforward levels that don't really pop visually, which ultimately results in a game that's not quite exceptional, but it's far from bad. And I do think it's alluring enough to capture the attention of indie action adventure fans. 3 out of 5. Screw it, Music Corner. Don't ask me to explain myself, you know where the skip button is. I did not listen to that Drake album, saw that train wreck coming from a mile off, but Giveon dropped a new project that I think suffers a little bit from his complacency in his current element, but is otherwise a really solid record. His emotional crooning over minimalist production is as enjoyable as it was on his debut EP, along with an even better understanding of creating catchy melodies this time around. And while I wish the album had a bit more diversity, I can't complain about hearing Giveon sing about sad stuff. I just can't. Posty's album might not live up to his last two for me personally, but it's a guilty pleasure listen. It feels in a weird way a bit cheap sounding at times. I feel like the mixing is off, but this man knows how to create earworm melodies and get me out here singing corny lyrics like nobody's business. I still came away liking this thing. Musically and in terms of pure rapping ability, Vinyl Days is one of Logic's best albums to date, but I didn't love it at first mainly because of its subject matter. There's a lot of I retired because of the bullshit, but now I'm back because I love it. He says it like 18 times on this album. And I swear I've heard this man do the I thought money and fame was the definition of dreams, but now I realize that stuff is not what it seems flip on every project since Young Sinatra 3. Have you been actively realizing the same concept for a full-on decade, Bobby? How is that even possible? There's a lot of illusion-breaking lines like that which really rubbed me the wrong way at first, but I've made my peace with it, and honestly Vinyl Days is a collection of a lot of really good songs and also La Donda, and it features a lot of amazing performances by everyone involved, Logic included. 070 Shake dropped a banger, my favorite out of all of these. The middle leg of this album is killer, and Shake's vocals are processed in a way that I can't get enough of. Panic at the Disco's comeback single was another one that I thought was middling at first, but I started digging it the more I heard it. It's very middle career Panic, which is interesting. And Gorillaz dropped a goddamn groove with Cracker Island. I am so excited for what they're cooking up. Alright, let's close this off with the last 3 games. Infernax is old school, which means that it's old school hard and it's also old school occasionally confusing. It doesn't have a massive map or anything, but I was still a little bit lost about what to do once or twice. I hadn't realized how many towns offered upgrades and extra lives and a bunch of other malarkey early on, so I spent an embarrassing amount of time being stuck on the first castle. I kept insta-dying throughout the whole game by falling into water or lava, and there were multiple times where I forgot that you had to manually save and I just lost a bunch of progress. Do I care? No, because for whatever reason, I'm a fan of the original Castlevania despite playing it for the first time 34 years after it released. There's a charm in the jank, the specific type of difficulty this game had, and the straightforward action, and Infernax is a perfect homage to that. It spruces things up with its own great soundtrack, a little pizzazz thrown into the presentation, splashes of beautiful artwork, and actual choices and different endings, all of which elevate the game exponentially, but it still maintains the heart of Castlevania. If you're a fan of the original Castlevania games, this is probably a 5. If you're not into them, then this might be a 3 because they don't really appeal to everyone, and neither will this. So I'm gonna meet in the middle and give Infernax a 4. Resident Evil 4. VR. This is actually my first time experiencing Resident Evil 4, and I'm glad that I'm doing it this way because while it might not be how the game was originally designed, I get to play all the good stuff from this game without being shackled by its age. The translation to VR is great. There is a layer of separation where the cutscenes are in 2D, jumping out of windows is in 2D, and kicking enemies to knock them down is in 2D, which, yeah, that is annoying, although I do get why that's the case, but when you are in VR, which is most of the time, it doesn't feel like a port, it feels like how the game was meant to be played. Grabbing weapons and tools from all the different pouches in your uniform feels natural. The game's not really scary, it's nowhere near as bad as it could be, honestly, which is nice because you don't realize how scary VR games can be until you're actually in VR. And accompanying the fun shooting and much more flexible movement and means of attacking in comparison to the original game is the highly praised story, setting, and epic moments of that original. I'm a touch under halfway through, I think, and it feels great to finally experience this game in such a fun way. If you have an Oculus or if you're planning on getting the PSVR 2 with the remix VR mode popping up for that, this should shoot up to the top of your to-play list. I hope we see more AAA games, old and new, get ported to VR because it works way better than I expected. 5 out of 5. And finally, ending off on maybe the shortest game on here, it's either this or Yoku's Disc Room. In this game, you basically get dropped into a bunch of little rooms with deadly blades and need to survive for as long as possible, with a few other challenges laid out on the side which will open up new rooms for you to face the challenges of. There's a few that are actually hard to decipher, and the solutions to some of this stuff is genuinely tough to figure out, which adds an extra layer to the experience, but this is mainly just a fun, short game with its own unique little loop. 3 out of 5. That's everything that I played and I guess watched and listened to in June. Let me know if anything caught your attention. Let me know what you played this month. I always like hearing about that. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.